Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our final webinar for the year. Today we're going to be talking about how do you fix a change that has not gone well, and we're going to look at the ABCs of ensuring you move forward positively. This is probably one of our favourite topics here at BDO.
It is.
We spend an enormous amount of time working with organisations on setting up change effectively, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we also have numerous opportunities to go in and help to rectify change when it hasn't gone well. So we're going to give you some of our insights as we go through that today. On the call today, we've got myself, Jenine Waters. I lead our people advisory team here in Sydney. We've got also with us Marianne Carter, our Associate Director. Hello. And Vanessa Vaillant, who is our change management expert extraordinaire.
Good morning.
So Vanessa is going to lead us today for a lot of the discussion. Before we get into that, I did just want to go through our usual housekeeping checks and balances. So first up, you can access the presentation slides in the handout pane, as you can see in the example there. All submitted questions will be responded via email after the session concludes. I will just say to you, we love it if you just message us directly. You'll see all of our emails at the end. So please feel free, whichever one of us or all of us you want to email with your questions, we're more than happy to connect with you. So that's probably the easiest way, or give us a call. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can see that address there, hopefully. If not, it's go to https://support.logmeininc.com/go-to-webinar. And then after the webinar, you will get a copy of the presentation slides. You'll get a link to the recorded session. That means you can listen to us numerous times in the lead up to Christmas.
So what they'll be doing.
You can access our past and our coming up webinars through there as well, and you'll also get our contact details. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa and we'll chip in along the way. So over to you.
Thanks, Jenine. We're so excited about this webinar. Close the year on the change. It's quite a hot topic these days. It's a constant in our lives. I think every day people experience change in different ways, and we're constantly trying to manage it all and make sense of it.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. You know, organizations are receiving external pressures, whether, you know, regulatory changes, as we saw in the Royal Commission, that are forcing financial institutions to really take ownership and implement some changes to how they work and deal with their customers. And there's also environmental concerns that are becoming ever more present in our workforce. And macroeconomics play a role, technology, competition. Organizations, we've noticed, are just trying to survive in some instances and stay one step ahead of the competition. If not, they're also just trying to thrive, to be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
And everyone is in this constant state of change, and quite frankly, sometimes we get the sense that it can be exhausting and quite draining from a people perspective.
We hear it all the time, don't we? One of the first things people say to us is, my business is change fatigued. And what we need to understand is that that's the way of the future. It's this constant change. So how do you essentially help an organisation deal with that constant change?
Well, we can't wait to share some of those insights with you. And I guess because of this constant state of change, whether from external forces or even internally, you know, there's lots of topic around culture transformation. We need to change our culture, or how do we make sure we have the right systems and tools to do our best work? And what is the customer saying? How can we be ahead of their needs? That change and the concept around change management has really become a way of life and a hot topic in a lot of these organizations, and probably your own as well. And it's become a discipline in itself across many of the industries. And I guess that's where we spend quite a bit of our time. And it's become even more present at the executive table, where you rarely see a project or a transformation that goes ahead without actually, at the very minimum, discussing the human element and the people perspective. Well, at least that's what we'd like to think, that it's often considered in some of these big transformations. At a minimum, there is discussion at the executive table.
Unfortunately, it doesn't always play out that way. And quite frankly, when we look at some of the clients that we work with, when they're bringing on board some new systems, it's actually the people element that they forget about, which is why we come in absolutely not a problem that we come in. But whatever change you're doing, unless you are fully automated, you really have to consider the fact that at the end of the day, you are impacting the way people will work, how they see the value that they bring. And the more you bring them on board, the better position you'll be in.
And even if you are fully automated, I don't know of many businesses that don't have somewhere down the line an impact on a person,
So
whether
true.
it's a customer, whether it's an input coming into your business, whatever it is, there will be people in the mix somewhere.
Even handovers.
Yeah. The other thing I hear from our clients still on a semi-regular basis is, oh, no, we're fine. We're just going to throw it over the fence and tell them to deal with it. So we'll develop this amazing solution. We'll develop this amazing process. We'll throw it over the fence and they'll deal with it. You know, we'll give them some training decks and all will be good.
Communications.
Yeah,
Lots of
a couple of
communication.
emails along the way and we'll be good. And unfortunately, it's rarely the case that that's enough.
Yeah, and the impacts can be quite vast, and sometimes you only see them after the project has gone live and you flip the switch and you realize, oh, look, we haven't exactly addressed the people element as we should have. So now we're in a state of, we need to course correct. We're not achieving the benefits we set out to in the business case, and it's a little bit of a scramble to get back on track.
Yeah.
And I mean, it says it in the research. We see, you know, McKinsey, Harvard, everyone is saying around 60 to 70% of transformations fail in organizational change projects. And so we want to explore with you a little bit why that happens and some of the complexities around change and how to rescue a change that hasn't gone well. So where does change go wrong? I think it's safe to say that most of us have experienced change failure in our career in some way, shape, or form, whether as a receiver of change or perhaps as in a leadership role where you were, you know, driving the change, and it was a difficult one. And at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to, you know, people aren't willing to change their mindsets and their behaviors to whatever that change is, whether it's a process change, whether it's a role shift, whether it's a new system or technology, whether it's how we interact with our customers. And that, as I said, has a cost to the organization. Financial, there's a risk, you know, you may lose your high performers and your valued employees. There's impacts to morale and culture, the undercurrents that you don't necessarily consider, you don't always see, or productivity dips. It can be quite impactful when you don't spend enough time considering the impacts to people and how you're going to keep that top of mind.
I know, Vanessa, when we talk about it, one of the things we say is, if you are an individual that has chosen to, let's say, change jobs, you are mentally preparing for that. You've made the decision, you've had full control, and you go ahead and you put in place whatever you need to achieve that piece. So anyone listening on the webinar, if you are affecting a change and no one is making that decision, so you are making a decision, you are owning it, you need to consider the fact that they haven't made it, so the way you approach it needs to equip them with everything that they need, because their mindset will not be ready to move and shift and change because they're not the ones making that particular decision initially.
That's exactly right, and that's, if you look at the slide, in terms of employee resistance, that's where it comes from and where it really stems from, is when you don't have control over what is happening to you, but you're still expected to buy in, to commit over something that you didn't have a say in. So it becomes that much more difficult. And you, at times, you might not agree with, and you may have to come around. It may be a compliance change that, you know, is absolutely required and there is no option. And just to build on that, Marianne, I think from a change management perspective, we think, you know, we just need to get from where we are today to where we're going, and we forget about that transition state in between, which is often uncertain and scary, and quite frankly, that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. It's not around, you know, where am I going, which can be daunting, but often what we see is when you get there, people are happy that they made the shift. It's just getting through that phase of uncertainty.
I love that you say that, because, you know, when you're going through a change, it's so hard to get to that end state. You've got to remember, and it's nice when you have someone that does this day in, day out to go, it's okay. It's just the transition. Once you've transitioned them, when they come out, you know, when it's all working and you've listened to them, and actually it's great.
Yeah, I can't imagine working in the old way of.
Yeah, how did we do that
It's
before?
really interesting because I know we're going to talk a little bit here around the role of the sponsor and leaders, and that is often so integral. I mean, Marianne and I have led change, and we've also been taken through many significant changes in our careers, and I'm sure you have too, Vanessa.
Vanessa leads us all, quite
yeah,
frankly.
Vanessa leads all of this. I just know of a couple of changes that Marianne and I have gone through as, I guess, recipients of change. And that role of the sponsor and that role of your leader guiding you through that is so critical during that period of transition and uncertainty. And I think that's the other key thing to understand is that as the changes that we go through in organisations are becoming more complex and are taking, in many instances, longer because you're dealing with, much bigger impacts than just, some of the smaller changes. The longer that period of uncertainty is as to what the end looks like, the harder it is to stay on track and to keep positive and to, even when you really, really want to. So really understanding some of those transitions, I think, is so critical. But we keep digressing from your sort of
No, this is exactly, I think, the conversation I wanted to have, and hopefully our listeners are enjoying this as well. But I do want to say, Jenine, exactly that, from the role of the sponsor. Everyone knows you need a sponsor on a project, but it's a different thing to know that you need a sponsor versus someone that actually embraces and assumes the role, and they're really clear on what a good sponsor looks like. Because, you can say I'm the sponsor, anyone can be a sponsor, but actually walking the talk and being active and visible, supportive, and supportive of that change is a different thing. And that's where we see sometimes our clients that, it's very clear who the sponsor is, what the role is, but that individual may not know how to execute on that role successfully. And that's where the role of a change manager, if you have that luxury, can be a big asset in going through change.
I will say as well, I think another thing around that role of the sponsor is if you don't understand the criticality of that role, we often load up certain people in an organisation with, you're sponsoring these 5 different key initiatives because it happens to be your job. If we don't recognise that the role of the sponsor is a very visible and active role and needs to be really critical in removing roadblocks and driving that change through, you can very quickly overburden people with that title and therefore not even set them up for success. You can't do it well across too many projects. You have to have the time to invest in it.
That is so true. So even as I reflect on some of the sponsors that we've worked with, it's the things that they're saying. I don't have time.
Yeah.
I can't get my head around it.
Yeah.
Just tell me what I need to do. So Vanessa's point around, you make sure the sponsor is clear of what their role is and what you need them to do, and show them each time what they need to do. Your ability to land something, it's massive, isn't it?
It is. And there's also the concept, which we'll explore a little bit later in the presentation, around building a coalition. So it is really difficult for one person, even at the top of the organization, to drive change that sustains over the long term throughout the entire organization. So that's where the value of building a coalition around the sponsor, as informal as it may sound and as simplistic as it can be, is really important. But we'll get to that. We talked a little bit about leaders' behaviors and how sometimes you underestimate the impact your direct line manager has when going through change, or in your day-to-day role. People look to who they trust and who they value, and that's often their direct line manager, to see how they react or how they behave or what they say around a particular change, and they take cues from that.
I so agree with that. And no matter who we're working with, whether you are a sophisticated organisation that truly understands the role of leaders and understand what that lever does to people, or an organisation that's not necessarily sophisticated there, but you do have leaders that manage people, no matter where you are on that continuum, your ability to recognise that line manager, what they say, how it comes across, their body language on that particular topic, actually speaks volumes to how many people you'll get coming up and believing in it and moving forward.
I so relate to this. I remember going through a reorganisation as an employee, and we went through it twice because, funnily enough, the first one failed. And when I think about it, there were many elements of many reasons why that first project failed. But one thing sticks out in my mind was my leader constantly said to me, "This is never going to work. I'm going to fight it all the way." And when I think about the one that it did get implemented, there the leader was steadfast around, yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, there's going to be aspects that we don't like, but this is going to happen and we will get there. And it's really up to us to figure out how we're going to get there as a team. So really understanding that impact. If you've got a whole heap of leaders that you haven't brought along the journey, then you can do the nicest communications on the planet, but they will be completely undermined the minute they get out there.
That's exactly right. And to those points, like Vanessa and I were just talking yesterday about it, if you are a leader that sits on the fence and doesn't have much of an opinion, you need to recognise, and those of you on the webinar that work with leaders, or if you are one yourself, you need to recognise the fact that your people look at you differently, and actually they look at you less favourably during that time of change.
They need your direction.
They need your direction more than ever, and if you don't have it, what you need to say to them is, I don't have that answer. Tell me what you're after and I will come back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Which we're going to get to in a little bit more detail later around some of the key things that you as a leader really need to think about in your role in the change.
We absolutely will. We're excited. Okay, let me wrap up on change fatigue and legacy of failed changes. This isn't going to be a surprise to anyone in terms of how easy it is to just, with everything going on, that you're caught in the middle and you can't quite figure out where you need to spend your time and your energy and where you need to focus on, given you have your day-to-day job and then you're being hit with changes from all different departments. So it becomes very difficult, and that can be a blocker to change. And also, you can't underestimate the legacy of failed changes from the past. There is an undercurrent within the culture, and you often hear, well, that change didn't go well, so this is just another kick at the can, this one won't work either.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and wait until it fails.
Yeah,
exactly.
I used to hear that all the time, and still do, unfortunately, many of our clients. But one of those things around change fatigue as well is, I think, I really agree with you around the role of the leadership team in really helping prioritise and all those. And there's also a role, if you're in an organisation, supporting a change from a change management perspective, to connect with those people who are leading changes in other teams as well.
Yes.
And really helping to understand, when you're working complex organisations with 10 different changes, you can't do them in isolation. You have to connect. And you have to understand, when we're going to impact, is that going to impact at the same time you're going to impact?
Yeah.
And that will help manage that change fatigue.
That's around the importance around having that portfolio view of change, and when are we impacting stakeholders, and is it too much for them to digest?
Exactly.
And what's the risk of delaying certain projects, or having that strategic perspective of change is so important. So right to me. Now, in terms of the complexities of change and why is it so difficult, let's walk through what we've noticed in working with our clients. And I think, when you say change management, everyone wants to say, oh yes, I know what it is and I know it's important. It's just about people. It's quite simple. It's training and communications.
Yeah.
And the more you do, the more likely they're going to come across and adopt that new system or that solution or that process.
I've got a great spreadsheet for that.
Exactly. Wouldn't it be nice if it was that easy?
I'd love it.
In reality, though, and in practice, it's complicated, it's messy, and oftentimes it's quite unpredictable. And that's because we're dealing with people, which can be all of those things. You have emotions, you have beliefs, you have values, you have personal context, you have culture. Many things that are out of your control, which is why change is so difficult. It's a process, and I think sometimes we forget that individuals will go through the change process. So from a place of, I don't know what's happening, I'm unaware of the change, I don't understand it, I may be resisting it, to get to the stage where I'm bought in, I'm engaged, I'm committed, let's do this, I'm excited. And you don't consider, that people go through those stages at different times. And you need to meet people where they are sometimes in that process, because you can't move to, here's your training and your training and your toolkit, if people don't even understand why we're doing this.
Yeah.
You'll never get the outcome and the buy-in and the change of behavior you need. It's just not possible.
I think what you say there is pretty powerful. because a lot of us know the model of, you know, you're in shock, you get angry, you kind of go through the acceptance stage, you go back a couple of steps. But having said that, what Vanessa's talking about is there is an actual process you've got to put in place to help people move along that continuum.
Yeah. Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
And at times, you know, the right answer, as obvious as it may seem, to the executives in terms of this is good for the business, this is where we need to go, or this is a compliance requirement that we have no choice to meet, that may not be enough to help individuals progress through that process.
Yeah.
Because it can be very personal change. And if you're asking a person to change their mindset and how they act and their behaviors and how they think, then you need to really put yourself in their shoes and understand the impacts to that individual and what might be in it for them. The famous saying in change management around what's in it for me.
Yeah.
And it is really important to take a step back and reflect on what are the impacts and the gains and possibly the pains for either that individual or that group of stakeholders in this process.
And I think one of the things around that I see happen a lot is a glossing over of the pain.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just focus on what's in it for you, and let's ignore the fact that actually you're about to put yourself through something, if you commit to this, that is going to be uncomfortable and may cause frustration and pain at different times. And I do see in a lot of change plans, it's just talking about what's great and not recognising, I know that you've said that this is going to cause some issues here, we recognise that, and let's help figure out the best way to manage that as well as
Yeah.
the other benefits out.
Yeah, that's totally true.
And what I like about that, it's simple.
Yeah.
Like some of the best change experts do it really simply. You said, we did.
It reminds me of, we often talk about kids as we talk about behaviour, because kids shows the simplest form of different behaviours.
Mm.
And it's like when a kid's really emotional about something, sitting there and giving them a logical, reasonable argument is probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
No, but you know, I know you really wanted to have Teddy, but let's just understand where Teddy's at in his journey of life, and he's off, you know, in the washing, whatever it is. Obviously, I've had blankie issues with my 4-year-old in the last couple of days, but the point is, sometimes you actually just have to stop and go, you know what, I get it. It's actually really frustrating. I know you don't want to be here right now, and I know you're going to be going through pain. We're just going to understand that. And
Yeah.
we're not even going to try to sell you something at
Yeah.
the moment until we've made sure you're really clear that we understand where you're at. So sometimes taking that step back and getting it back to the simplest nuts and bolts of where a person's at is really critical.
Yeah.
Also from a communication perspective, where you can be very sharp, concise, impactful, that's what's most effective. Tell people what they need to know when they need to know it, because we all know, for any of the communication experts that are on the line, that whatever message you send, while the intentions may be good and in your mind it was the perfect communications, clear key messages, that what was received at the other end was probably not what you sent.
Yeah.
Just because of our personal context lens and how we see things and how we interpret different messages given our personal context. It's
Yeah.
really that simple, and that you need to consistently repeat messages. I think they say 5 to 7 times
Yeah.
at a minimum. And that's a consistent message, right? For it to really take hold.
And not just in email.
I was going to say, and not in one way.
Yeah.
No, exactly. You've got to get, you know, we talk about the sponsor and that leadership coalition. We talk about the line managers. There are a lot of ducks that need to get in a row for
Yeah.
change to really be successful and stick over the long term.
So, like, I just always think about, if you just think of yourself as an employee and then you think, okay, I've been told that this thing is great because of X. If I was told that by my line manager, then I hear my CEO saying it, then I see it in a newsletter.
Yeah.
It's coming at me from different angles, and I kind of get the feeling that maybe I can't escape this. Maybe this really is the, you know.
Yeah.
So just saying it again and again in different mediums actually helps people go, there's a new story being written here. There's a new thing that I need to be attached to.
And from different people and stakeholders that you trust.
Yes.
And that you know they have the organization's best interests at heart.
Yes.
And it's consistent and everyone's on board at that level. So it's
Even thinking outside the box sometimes of who's sending those messages. How powerful sometimes to hear from your customer, I would really like it if you could help me in this way. And connecting that back to the change that you're doing internally. Those sorts of things as well, where, you know, who the person who you most want to impact positively, if they feel good about this, then you're going to feel good about this more likely.
Yeah.
absolutely true. Now, in terms of misinformation and rumors, this is not surprising for anyone. That remember how I talked about that transition phrase from where we are today to where we're going? In that space, there can be, it's not quite uncertain, there can be silence because we're still working through project decisions or we're not quite clear on exactly where we'll land. And sometimes the tendency is to just be silent, and that's where it creates room, where people create stories, and you voice those stories, and the water cooler conversations happen around what's happening and how am I being impacted, and that can quickly spiral out of control.
It's that old adage of, in the absence of information, people make up their own.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's that simple. So you need to maintain that communication at the right times and share information that you do know. I think transparency is important to build that trust.
I agree. And when that does happen, when the water cooler conversations actually do create a different story, you need to step in and say, I'm hearing this. This is what I'm hearing saying. Let me help you. Let me address it. Let me help you understand what's actually happening.
Close that gap.
Close the gap for people.
It's also an important part of recognising when to start communicating. Sometimes we get really excited about, oh, we've agreed to spend this much money on this, but we haven't really thought any further than that. And we want to go out there and tell everybody. I often find leaders in businesses get really excited about some of the decisions that they've made, and they start communicating it before they've actually thought through any of this stuff. And that's often where that big gap then comes of, I've said something that I think is really exciting, your reaction to that might be quite different, and now it's radio silence for the next 3 months while I actually get my head around what that's going to look like and how it might come. So even some of that right back at the beginning, getting clear on this.
Yeah, that's so true. It can be so difficult sometimes. Because you are excited, but that also had that period in between also has an impact on the project team and maintaining their energy levels.
Yes.
So it is key to think about the timing and the sequence of how you communicate and how often and with who.
And in areas where that might be happening, for those of us on the webinar, what you can do is actually involve people in that decision making.
Yeah.
So you can bring people along and let people know, okay, we've announced this, we've now got a team together to look at it. We're going to come back to you in just give a few weeks to give you an update of where we're at. Just knowing something is happening, as opposed to what Janine's saying, like, you know what, we go into radio silence, helps people fill in those gaps as well.
That it's under control, exactly right. One of the other complexities around change is, this is an interesting one because it's reaction versus resistance. And we sometimes forget that it is okay and natural and human to have an emotional reaction to something that impacts you. That is okay. And it's around recognizing that and allowing for time and space to go through those emotions and those reactions, and then giving people the information they need to make a decision to buy in and to commit and to come through the change journey. I think we try and squeeze the reaction time to very minimal, and we don't allow for much of it. And we give lots of information on why we're doing this, why it's important, and then expect people to come along right away. And I will say, in my experience in working with clients, that the greater the impact of that change on the individual, so whether it may be, it may fundamentally impact your role or your finances or your life at its core, that you probably need more time to come to terms with that and get through your emotions and your reactions.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that come to mind for me there when you talk about that. Sometimes we do underestimate how core that impact is. If you're, financially, all of those, we get those, but sometimes what we might not get is when we're impacting the way a person connects with their key stakeholders, their customers. That's actually hugely important to a person, and we might gloss over that if we're not connected to that role. So I think sometimes really digging deep to understand just how big an impact this might be is important. The other thing I will say is, and Marianne sort of alluded to this a minute ago when she talked about in that space, actually going out and saying we're going to collaborate and we're going to get input. That's amazing. When we've seen that work well, and we've worked on some projects together where a client has said, you know what, I'm going to open up and really go out to our key stakeholders and really let them talk to us about what's going on, ask them the key questions, and be genuine in the fact that we will bring that feedback into the solution design. I think that's massive because it really allows that reaction to be genuine. It really allows people to react, and it also allows you to take some of the insights from that and not just look at it as how do we squash it, but actually how do we understand what's the root cause of that reaction. And is it something that's valid that we need to consider in terms of the design, or is it something that we just need to support you with to get to a point where you understand why the change is happening?
Yeah.
That is the most powerful voice, really. You can't underestimate the client, the customer who you're impacting, and you need to go to them for that source of information.
Yeah. And there's just one thing I'll just add here
Please go.
in terms of reaction versus resistance. What I love about this one is when we are in organisations, I think we forget sometimes your initial reaction does not actually tell you who the resistors will be.
Yeah.
Yes,
This is why I love you've got this in here. When Vanessa talks about it, when we're offline, what she talks about is actually what you've got to be looking for is when people have the information they need and then they're beginning to resist. That's what you're looking for in terms of resisting. It's not the initial reaction.
Yeah, and it's okay that a person might have an initial reaction
Yeah.
that seems to be resistance because they're processing.
That's
They're
right.
coming up with, and you'll naturally go to, different thinkers will think in different ways. Some people go straight to the positives,
Yeah.
and they might end up being a resistor when they start to see the detail. Other people will go straight to the analytical, this is why it won't work, and then as they work through it, they'll go, actually, yeah, I'm good with the answers that we've got here.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really valid point, Marianne.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. All right, let's take a forward perspective now in terms of what are the conditions that are necessary to help shift mindset and behavior. And this is anchored in research and psychology, and we just want to share with you, how do you actually shift the mindsets and behaviors given all the complexities of change and the constant state of change that we're in. And the first one is around building that change story. You refer to that in different ways: the burning platform, the reason why, the greater vision, the purpose. It comes in many different shapes and forms, but what's important is that you get people to understand why you're doing this, where you're going, and what's expected of me, so that they can make the decision and have the information to partake in that and want to be part of it because it's exciting, because that information is compelling and it's clear and it's got that burning platform and that excitement around it. And if you're familiar with the ADKAR from ProSci model, this is the awareness and desire piece. And it's important to consider in developing that change story what motivates people, because what motivates your leadership team may not be the same motivation for what impacts your customers or your clients or your front line that interact with the customers.
Yes.
You just need to think about, how do I build a change story that people want to be part of?
And I think the other element of what I like around that is that the word story. And it's not just a group of bullet points on a page. It's actually got to be something that people can connect with, and being clear on the story of that, I think, is really a powerful way of communicating it.
Yeah.
It really is. The next way to start shifting mindsets and behavior, and we've talked about this already, but we just can't say it enough, is the role of your direct line manager, that concept of being a role model and walking the talk. And you may not necessarily have to be a leader to do that. You may be someone in the organization that is highly influential and that people look to and they value and they trust you. So don't think that just because you don't have a team reporting to you that you don't have an impact or an ability to influence those around you. You still do.
Yes.
And it's, as an employee, it's me saying, I see my manager, I see my peers, those that I trust and that are competent and that are really good at their jobs. And I even see, the CEO behaving in this new way. And I want to follow them. It can be so impactful.
There's some really simple examples I've seen on this, and some of the changes that we see in organisations is going to agile working spaces or hot desking and all of those, which is more and more the norm in organisations. And there's things like that simple fact that the CEO every day comes in and takes a different seat.
Yeah.
and moves around and makes a point of never sitting in the same seat for more than a day in a row, never being the one to go and take a meeting room and sit there for a period of time. Some really physical representations of I'm on board with this, and you're going to see me model the change that I really want to see from you. Whereas often we'll find, it'll be, oh, all of you need to do this, but I'm going to still stay in my ivory tower or do it the way that I've done it. So I think some of those are really powerful ways to think about that. And the other thing I think is really important as a leader, and we've referred to it before, is to actually sit down and think about, if this was happening to me, if I was in this role, how would I feel? And it's a lot of what we do when I sit through and go through a change. We do a lot of work with organisations looking at their HR structures, for example. Now, we've been in HR structures before. We've had change happen to us in our roles. And so every time I sit down and we work through how we're going to help with this reorganisation, we sit down with the lens of how did it feel when this happened to us? How did it feel when we weren't involved in it? How did it feel, and how could we change that story this time around? How could we involve people in the decision making? And I think as a leader, being able to put yourselves in other people's shoes and then model the behaviour that would help you in that environment is really powerful.
Yeah,
absolutely right. And the other point I want to make on the role models and influence, just to add on to what you said, Jenine, is around holding each other accountable at the executive table.
Yes.
That needs to happen.
It's not just the sponsor that's expected to act in that way. We talked about the coalition, and we talked about it's okay to say to someone, pull them aside after a meeting, say, I need you to step up and to act in the way, to model these behaviors for our organization. It's important to us.
Yeah.
What I love about that is you're holding people to account. And we've got to remember, when you are a line manager, it is an absolute privilege. You are privileged with leading people and keeping their best interests at heart. So if you see other leaders not behaving in that way, you really need to pull them up. It's not fair. People deserve the best role model that they can have. So I love that, Vanessa.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of capabilities and know-how, you can't operate in whatever that new state, use that new system, be successful in your role without actually knowing what is expected of you and having the capabilities and the skills and the knowledge to do that well. So often this is around, we think of training that delivers those capabilities. Because you can't expect someone to use the new CRM tool if you haven't showed them how to use it and you haven't provided your tools and templates. That's just unrealistic. And from the ADCOG perspective with ProSci, that's really around the knowledge and ability.
And what I love about this is if you're not on your change and communications plan and you're not adjusting to keep in track with the project, where this can fall down is you said you were going to deliver the training in January, you deliver the training in January and you're completely on track. However, the project has shifted out and the implementation is now not going to happen until March. All of a sudden, you're frustrated because I did all the training, it was amazing, but people didn't get access to the system for another 2 or 3 months. And therefore, anything they learned during that time is completely forgotten. It sounds really simple, but I'm still amazed at the number of times we might move ahead with different points of a project because that's where we said it was going to happen, without recognising that there is an element of I need to do it at a time when people can then practice it and implement it, and then I need to have people on the ground to help them with it until they're proficient.
And the other part of it as well is that when you're going through training and actually you're receiving feedback over what should shift or what makes more sense, take it on board.
Yeah,
Why do we not sometimes take this feedback on board? They're helping embed a system. They're there, they're ready, they want to use it. So don't ever turn off the listening.
Yeah.
All this does is move you closer and closer to everyone taking it on board.
Yeah, and also to designing a solution that's fit for purpose.
That's right.
And that meets the needs and that you have less rework. So you've got to bring that back to the development team.
Yeah.
You should, keep two-way channels open where you can.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then for change to be successful and to really stick, reinforcements are imperative. And what we mean by that is around having the processes, the structures, the systems, and the tools that drive that future state behavior, because it is human nature to revert to what is comfortable and what you know, because it's easy. So you need to force me to change how I do things for this to last. And that will become the new normal.
That is so powerful. And I know it sounds a bit, I don't know, but you do need to force people to shift. So even when we talk about, shifts in culture or shifts in behavior, like if we just talk about that at its, top floaty core, unless you put a process and system in place that stops people doing what they did before, guess what? They're just going to go back to it. So even as something as, I don't want to use the word fluffy, but fluffy as culture, you need to put as part of it, not just telling them what it looks like, but what is it that you're going to do to change? So think about it. We're driving to work. I go to work the way I always go, the same road. But one day I'm driving to work and all of a sudden I've got a detour. Am I going to knock over the detour sign and keep going across? No, I'm going to, have a few words to myself, follow the detour, come out the other end and find out, that wasn't too bad. So in any culture change, to Vanessa's point, what are you going to do to shift that? What are you going to put in place to help people get there?
I love that analogy.
You really have to remove the old ways of working. Fundamentally, until the new ways.
Turn off legacy systems, take away the, whatever it is. You have to think clearly about what they are and you have to remove them or shut them down or whatever.
Or, remove access. There are ways you've got to think about, you've just got to take action. I'll leave you with this point on this slide before we move on, that just to be aware that within this psychology framework and when you're shifting mindsets and behaviors, that your beliefs as an individual, your attitudes and your social norms will influence how you take on change. And it's just something to be aware of, and it's often out of our control, but just keep that top of mind, because as we keep saying, those line managers that are really strong, they're in tune with what this means for their people, and they know exactly what motivates them and how the impact they have, and how best to develop their capabilities. So keep that top of mind. All right, let's keep going. How to rescue a change that didn't land. We've all been here. Some of us have had a laugh. Some of us have probably had a cry. Here we are. We want to give you some insight on the road to recovery from something that didn't quite go well. And it's not, from our perspective, we take quite a practical approach to change, that's grounded in a process and tools, but it's really about people and how do we make them shift. And it's not about, completing a new template or developing a new communications necessarily, or, you need to change the training focus. It may be about those elements, but really, to rescue something that hasn't landed, you firstly need to get clear on the impact. So why didn't this change go well? Where did we fall off the tracks? What was the gap? Was it, people didn't know how to use the system? Did they not understand why we're moving in this direction? And you may need to talk to those that are impacted to get really clear on what that is. Don't make any assumptions here, because you won't be able to course correct. The next thing is around giving leaders clear ownership and accountability. So it's in the instance where there is no willingness to make a course correction or make a change to address it, you ask those leaders that made this decision to go back to the impacted stakeholders and explain to them why this didn't happen or why it's not happening and why we're not taking any action. Because this forces the question from a personal perspective around, will I put my name to this?
Yes.
Which is hard for people to do. It's not saying this was an organizational decision. It's saying, me as Vanessa, I've made this decision and I need to explain it to you this way. And this is why we're not going. And that has a lot of weight to it from a leader's perspective. And the next thing is around, how can we, if you're making the change and, you're getting it back on track, how do we better meet those needs and close that gap? Talk to your stakeholders, even go to your customers. How are they experiencing this? How does this trickle throughout the organization? What does it look like from the customer perspective? Get them to tell you. Jenine talked a lot about that and the power of that. And we shouldn't shy away from just asking them, what do you need to come on board? Or how are you experiencing this? How can we help you?
And I think the paradigm you take into asking that question is really, really important, because if you go into that saying, okay, everything you tell me is an indictment on what I've done to date, and therefore it's about me taking criticism and performance feedback and those sorts of things, then it gives you a level of resistance to, I don't really want to hear why this hasn't landed. If you go into this with the paradigm of, I'm here to make this work and I'm here to understand, and every single piece of information you give me that helps me understand that, no matter what my involvement or anybody else's involvement was on making that original decision, every piece of information I get is going to help me land this, then you have a completely different perspective, and you welcome any of the stuff. If I go into a meeting and I know a change hasn't landed and everybody tells me, oh no, it was fine, the communication was good and blah, 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 that doesn't help me. I want to hear the stuff that's really hard, and that will help me course correct.
Yeah,
absolutely right. And then once you have that information, Jenine, that's where, you know, you take action and you provide the solution to close that gap. And where you can give, you know, some stakeholders control over shaping that solution, you should do that, because people are more likely to buy in.
Yeah.
If either they've been engaged or they're empowered to make a decision somewhere along that process.
Vanessa, what you're talking about here is just so simple and so real that anyone listening, if you've done a change that hasn't gone well, the advice here is it's all right. Go to the pit, go where the pain is, understand the pain, build your next way forward from that pain, because the only way from there is up, the only way.
And can I just say as well, we talk about change here, and we're often talking about it in the context of big projects. A lot of what we do, if you're on the phone and you work in any support function, a lot of what we do actually has to change. Whether it's as simple as trying to implement a new policy, or whether it's a new template or form, or whether it's a new system, whatever the change is, the same principles actually apply. Going out and talking to the people that you're going to impact, asking them what would work for them, and developing your solution accordingly. But also, if it doesn't go well, going and asking the question, why didn't that resonate? Why am I not getting people signing up to their performance management process? Whatever it is, use those principles.
And get your leaders to take ownership and accountability in the process. All right, we want to share with you some of the lessons learned that we've kind of gathered over the years in our experience in working with different clients. And as Jenine said, in large scale system changes, but we've also been a part of smaller scale changes and, you know, not-for-profit organizations. And it's a different perspective, but fundamentally, it's the same, you know, lessons and the same process that we use, and it's just tailored to the size and the uniqueness and cultures of that organization. Now, the first lesson we want to share with you is around, we talked a lot about, you know, the legacy of failed changes. So this is particularly around that. And it's, you can only replace whatever that negative story is with a good one. So find one in your organization that's a good news story where you've had a turnaround, you know, may have gone south or got a little bit rocky, and then, you know, you course corrected, you understood from your customers what they needed, what information to give them, what training, and client satisfaction increase. Whatever it may be, every organization has a good story. You just need to get clear on what it is, and then make sure that everyone is singing from that same songbook to kind of start shifting the mindset away from that negative, because the negative seems to live on forever.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And
the positive ones are often quickly forgotten,
yes,
but the negatives do live on. So if you can find one of those positive ones and say, we can do this, we have done this, this is how we're going to do it.
So for those of you that kind of tackle it from a data, or, you know, but it will do this and it will do that, and no, that didn't work because of this data, that's not how you approach it. Yeah. So when you go to rebuttal, to Vanessa's point, you tell a story. You make it live in the heart, and you keep telling the story. You show it in different ways.
Exactly right. The other lesson that we continuously learn and tell our clients, and we've talked about this, is around building that coalition with leaders. So once you're clear on who your sponsor is, they cannot do it alone. No single person can affect change in an organization. We don't need science to tell us that. That's just the reality. So if you're in a change role, or you're supporting a change in any capacity, you need to help the sponsor identify who they want next to them when things get rocky, or when they need to remove roadblocks, or when they need support at the executive table. You get really clear on who those people are and work with the sponsor to make sure that they come along together.
We've had one project that we've worked on recently where we've had 2 sponsors, and it's been with 2 different lenses working together in partnership, and they've kept each other clear on where we're trying to go to, and they have, you know, a different stakeholder perspective that they bring together. That's been really powerful in that particular project. Now, it's not going to work for everybody, but however you structure it, it's identifying those people that are going to have an influence and an impact and keeping them close to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. People commit when they have control. We've also touched on this, where you can empower your stakeholders to make a decision, however big or small, whether that's a role in the change process, whether that's involvement in designing the future state, where you can get your people to take ownership in the process. Stay connected to the why. It can be a tough gig to be a leader through change, to be a change manager, to be a line manager. That's why it's important to always come back to the vision and the why you're doing this, because you will get resistance. It's a dream to think that you would never get resistance in any type of change. It goes against human nature. And it is a particular skill, you know, to stay on and focus and moving forward through change, while at the same time listening to your people and influencing them and making sure the leaders are all aligned. So you need to come back to the why you're doing this, and that will give you energy and comfort.
True. So true.
You can't underestimate the value of planning for, but also celebrating quick wins. There comes a time when the project, you know, may hit a wall, you may get stuck. There may not be decisions that come through as fast, and that impacts morale. There's not clarity, the leadership changes. There's a million reasons why this happens, but what's important is that you build into your plan short-term goals, and you make a point of celebrating them.
Yeah.
Doesn't, big or small, you know, I've worked with clients where we've celebrated them in morning teas, and we recognize milestones, and it gives us a chance to connect and laugh and to build relationships, and that's re-energizing.
Yeah.
And that's not a big thing. And the last lesson we want to share with you is, for change to stick and be everlasting, you need to make it part of the DNA. It's just part of the way we do things around here. And the way to do that is through the reinforcements, removing the workarounds, putting the systems, the processes in place.
Yes.
All right, we're flying through this, lots of information. We want to leave you with this around leading through change, because it can be difficult on top of your day-to-day responsibilities. You know, you're expected to do so much, you're short on time, it's just not a priority. You may not see exactly how this adds value to your role directly, but you do have an influence, and it's important that, you know, you acknowledge that. And we're not saying, you know, you revolutionary change who you are as a leader,
No.
but there are some insights that you can tweak your perspective in terms of how you communicate or how you act with your teams.
Yeah, and those of you on the webinar that are not necessarily leaders, but you lead change, or could be change managers, these are some things to keep your eye on when you're looking at leaders across your organisation.
Absolutely.
I would also say, as a HR practitioner or as a leader who brings people into an organisation, if you know that your business is going to be going through significant change, and let's face it, nearly all of us are, look for this in the people that you bring in as well. Look for the change muscle, understand how people have led through change in the past, because there's almost no role in a leadership position these days that leading a team through change is not going to be a part of it at some point. Very true.
And I don't think we spend enough talking about what that really means. You know, we say, oh, here are the capabilities you need, but, you know, this is the communication you should deliver. This is how you should act. In practical terms, what do I need to do as a leader to show that I'm supportive?
Yeah.
And the first one is certainty. So this is around, give me some certainty in a time of uncertainty and in a time of change. And it's anchored in Maslow's hierarchy around, you know, at the base of the pyramid, it's the physiological needs, but then next on top of that is the safety and security. So if I'm an employee, or if you're a manager rather, you need to take the perspective that if you don't have an answer to someone's question, you're one of your staff's or a colleague's question around a change, that you will go back and find out, or you will share what you know with that individual. Right. The next one is around influence. So take the time to understand the needs of your people or those around you and deliver for them. And don't be afraid to ask them, what do you need to get through this change? How can I help you? That can be quite powerful. And then Marianne, you touched on this one, and I love this, around the fence sitting. So a line manager that doesn't have an opinion on a change, is unsure, you know, they hum and ah, that's probably the worst kind of manager you can be in a state of change, because the employee or your colleague will perceive you as having, you know, zero influence, maybe not being engaged, and as a result, maybe not having an impact on my career development and where I'm going. So
I actually feel anxious just thinking about having a manager that would just give me nothing. You know, I'd almost rather have a manager be negative about a change so that I can argue against it than have someone who just fence sits.
That's exactly right.
the next one is around informative. You as an individual, as a staff, you want to know that your manager is in the know. They're part of it. They're at the table. They're having these conversations, and that I can go to them. Yeah. And that what they know, they're sharing with me.
Yes.
Big or small.
Yeah, my manager's all over it. I feel secure. They're going to be in there. I have no, when they know that, their energy is not lost in uncertainty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the last one, as simple as it sounds, it's show up and be present. So walk the talk, model the behaviors. Words often, or actions speak louder than words, right?
And I still remember going through one change where the whole leadership team was so struggling with the change that they were delivering, that they spent their time in a meeting room all together, and that was great for each other. They were supporting each other through it because that was a difficult change to implement. But what it meant was their whole teams were just rudderless.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was happening. They couldn't see their manager to even get a cue from them as to how they should be managing through this. So sometimes it's actually one of the toughest things as a leader, but to show up and to be present and to not withdraw from the change.
Yeah. Absolutely. So keep this in mind next time. Share this with your teams or your leaders in terms of how to be a successful leader through change.
So,
and I think your comment earlier, Marianne, about hold each other accountable, having something like this makes it easier to sit back and say, hey, you know, we're gonna be great leaders through this change. If you see me fence sitting or you see me not being present, I'd really like you to come and talk to me, because it might mean that I actually need some support as well to get through this and to deliver the right sort of attitude that's going to help my team.
Yep,
absolutely
so true.
Right.
Wow. So thank you, Vanessa.
Well,
what a great time.
I think it's the longest one we've ever done, but we've just delivered it bang on midday. So thank you all for hopefully staying connected through all of that. We've got you delivered in time for your lunch break, so go off and enjoy. Our contact details are up there. Callie couldn't join us today, but you would normally hear her throughout.
She's still on the webinar though, I will say.
And please don't hesitate to go and look at us on the BDO website. All of our past webinars are there, so if there's other topics that are of interest to you, then please do go and connect with them. But anyway, thank you again for your time this year. Oh, there's our past webinars up there, so if any of those topics are of interest, go back, have a look at them. You can download them very readily. Our slides are pretty simple, so you can listen to these when you're driving the car or something without having to read the slides as you go. So that's all easy. And have a great Christmas, because we won't be online again before then. So have a great Christmas, and we'll be back with more webinars in the new year.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
See you, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.